In a small town, there lived a father and his young daughter. He was a man of simple principles. He truly believed that if he just worked hard and saved every extra penny, he would eventually become rich. He dreamed of a day when his life savings would be enough to fulfill every one of his daughter's dreams and secure their future. So, for 20 years, he sacrificed. No vacations, no luxuries, no comfort. Every single month, he tucked a portion of his paycheck into a savings account, trusting the system. But there was one thing he didn't know, one ugly truth that nobody ever told him. He was chasing a lie. He believed that saving money was the path to wealth, but in reality, he was just building a trap for himself. 20 years passed. The day finally came when he opened that savings account, expecting his financial freedom. But the moment he looked at the screen, his heart sank. His life's work, all those years of sacrifice, couldn't even cover 3 months of his daughter's college expenses. The cost of living had skyrocketed, and inflation had eaten his security alive. That was his breaking point. That was the moment he realized that saving money doesn't make you rich, it keeps you poor. That day, he stopped dreaming and started learning. He discovered 5 secrets that didn't involve saving at all. They involved making his money grow. Today, I'm going to share those 5 principles with you. In that small town, the father didn't just dream of paying the bills or scraping by. He had much bigger ambitions. He was the man who spent his nights staring at the ceiling, imagining a life where he belonged among the wealthy. A life where money was no longer a cage, but a key. He was obsessed with the idea of becoming rich. He lived for the day when his hard work would finally bloom into a massive fortune. He believed the formula for wealth was simple, almost mathematical. Cut every expense, sacrifice every luxury, and hoard every extra dollar into a savings account. To him, that bank account wasn't just a place to keep cash, it was his ticket to the upper class. Every single month, he meticulously transferred a portion of his paycheck into it. For him, those numbers on the screen represented the mansion he would one day buy, the high-end cars he would drive, and the respect he would finally command in society. Whenever his daughter would ask for a small toy or a treat, he would gently push her hand away and say, "Not now, honey. We are building our future. We are saving up for something so big that one day we'll be able to buy anything we want." He truly believed he was ahead of the game because he was a saver. He had this unshakable conviction that as the years rolled by, that growing balance would eventually act as his bridge from poverty to the pinnacle of success. He was convinced that in 20 years, his persistence would pay off in a mountain of cash that would finally turn his dreams into reality. He was sacrificing his entire life for that future someday, anchored to the belief that saving every penny was the only path to becoming rich.
Years turned into decades, and for this father, those 20 years felt like a relentless marathon. He became a man whose entire existence revolved around one single stubborn word: saving. He stripped his life of anything he deemed unnecessary, convincing himself that every dollar spent on joy was a dollar stolen from his future fortune. He never once took a summer vacation. Why would he? Travel was expensive, and hotels were just holes where money disappeared. He drove the same beat-up car for nearly 2 decades, spending his weekends repairing the engine himself, refusing to let a new car payment touch his wealth fund. The furniture in his living room was the same set he'd bought when he first moved in, frayed, worn out, and outdated, but he wouldn't dream of replacing it. The hardest part, though, was watching his daughter grow up. Whenever she begged to go on a school trip or asked for a simple dress for a school dance, he would tighten his grip on his wallet. He'd pull her close and say, "Sweetheart, that's just a waste. We're saving for something big. When I finally become rich, you'll have everything you ever wanted." He stopped eating out, stopped buying new clothes, and stopped going to the movies. His friends called him cheap. Some even whispered that he was losing his mind. But he didn't care. He smiled through it all, finding a twisted sense of comfort in his deprivation. He truly believed that every sacrifice he made today was an investment in a golden tomorrow. He would stare at his growing bank balance and imagine it becoming a mountain of wealth. He was completely blind to the fact that his mountain was being slowly eroded by the passage of time. He had mortgaged 20 years of his life, trading his present for a future that existed only in his head. 20 years had passed. The father was older now, his hair thinning, his back a bit more stooped from the years of hard labor. He had poured every ounce of his youth into that savings account, holding on to it like a holy relic. But while he had been busy saving, the world outside had been changing, a reality he had completely ignored. He was still dreaming of the wealth he had built, but he had no idea that the ground beneath his feet had shifted. Rent had doubled, grocery bills had tripled, and the cost of quality education had soared to levels that made his humble savings look like pocket change. He was living under a classic, dangerous delusion that if you hoard enough paper, you become rich. He didn't understand that the money he was protecting in that bank was actually dying a slow death. Every dollar he tucked away was losing its strength, silently eaten away by the invisible thief known as inflation. He thought he was constructing a fortress of gold. In reality, he was building a sandcastle on the shoreline. Every year, his money could buy a little less than it could the year before. He was clinging to the outdated, broken promise that saving equals wealth. He didn't realize that saving is just a defensive tactic that keeps you stagnant, while inflation is an offensive force that never sleeps. He was still waiting for his big day, unaware that the math of his life no longer added up. He wasn't getting closer to his dreams. He was just watching them slowly dissolve, one deposit at a time.
The day he had been waiting for, the day he had built his entire life around, finally arrived. His daughter, Emma, had been accepted into a prestigious university. For the father, this wasn't just a college admission. It was the coronation of his 20-year sacrifice. He felt like a king as he drove her to the campus, his checkbook tucked securely into his pocket, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. He still remembered the exact feeling of the first dollar he had tucked away 2 decades ago. Since then, he had multiplied that effort thousands of times over. He never doubted for a second that he had won. He walked up to the admissions counter with his head held high, ready to settle the bill and watch his daughter step into her future. But as the admissions officer processed the numbers, the father's world stopped spinning. He looked at the screen, and his hands began to tremble. He blinked, thinking he had misread the figure. He blinked again. The university tuition, adjusted for inflation, was significantly higher than the total amount he had spent 20 years sweating, starving, and saving for. The mountain of wealth he had meticulously built was barely enough to cover a single semester. The noise of the bustling campus faded into a dull, agonizing ringing in his ears. He looked at Emma, who was beaming with excitement about her future, and then back at the checkbook that had suddenly become worthless paper. The 20 years of driving a rusted car, the missed vacations, the skipped meals, the constant "not now,"
It all flashed before him. It wasn't a badge of honor anymore. It was a memorial to a life wasted. He stood there, frozen, struck by a cold, sharp truth. He hadn't been building a future. He had been drowning in the past. The father stumbled out of the university admissions hall, his legs feeling like lead. He had told Emma, who was buzzing with excitement, to grab a coffee at the campus cafe while he finished a few last-minute financial checks. He couldn't let her see the truth that his 2 decades of sacrifice had amounted to almost nothing. He wandered blindly until he reached a sprawling, lush park nearby and collapsed onto a bench, head in his hands. That's when a familiar voice called his name. It was John, a childhood friend who had worked at the same factory as him years ago. But John was a changed man. He was dressed in a sharp suit, radiating peace and clearly thriving. John didn't waste time on pleasantries. He sat down, looked his broken friend in the eyes, and said, "I know that look. I had it once too. Tell me everything." The father told him everything. The 20 years, the savings, the number on that screen, the checkbook that meant nothing anymore. John listened without interrupting. When his friend finished, John was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something the father had never heard in his entire life. He said, "You didn't fail because you worked too little. You failed because nobody taught you that saving money and growing money are 2 completely different things. Saving protects what you have, but growing multiplies it, and the world never stands still long enough for saving alone to win."
John didn't offer pity. He offered a bridge. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his checkbook, and wrote a check for the full year's tuition without a second thought. "Take this," John said firmly, pressing the check into his friend's hand. "This isn't charity. It's an investment in the father who loved his daughter enough to sacrifice everything. Emma's education will be covered." The father's hands shook. He tried to protest, but John held up a hand. "Stop. You spent 20 years playing defense, trying to hoard what you already had. But look at the calendar. Emma's journey is just beginning. In the next 12 months, while she is focused on her studies, you have a massive opportunity. You don't need another 20 years to turn this around. You need 1 year of changing the way you think." John looked him straight in the eyes. "I'm going to teach you the 5 principles that built everything I own. If you commit to these 5 secrets for the next year, not by saving, but by growing, you will see more progress in these 12 months than you did in those 2 decades of misery. You spent your life watching your money die. Now, are you ready to learn how to make it live?" The father looked at the check, then at his friend, and finally up at the clear sky. For the first time in 20 years, he didn't feel the weight of his past. He felt the terrifying electric spark of a future. He nodded. He was ready. John pulled out a small notebook and began to speak, not like a lecturer reading from a list, but like a man sharing the hard lessons of his own life, one story at a time. The first thing John told him was this: "Your money must work, not sit." John explained that for years he too had kept his savings in a bank, feeling safe. But one day he realized that the bank was using his money to make investments and earning returns while paying him almost nothing in return. He said, "I stopped being the bank's employee and started being my own investor. I put my money into income-generating assets, things that paid me while I slept. Stocks, small business shares, anything that worked on my behalf around the clock. Your money should be a worker, not a prisoner." The second thing John told him was about knowledge. John said, "Before I invested a single dollar outside, I invested deeply inside my own head.
I spent months learning about markets, about business, about how wealth actually moves in this world. The biggest return on investment isn't in a stock, it's in your own mind. The more you understand, the more the market pays you. You spent 20 years perfecting your job skills. Now spend the next year perfecting your financial skills. The third principle, John said, was the one that changed everything for him. He called it the snowball. He said, every dollar you earn from an investment, you must reinvest. Don't spend your profits, plant them back into the ground. A snowball rolling down a hill starts small, but becomes unstoppable. Compound interest works the same way. Stop spending your dividends, let them buy you more assets. Over time, this becomes a force that no savings account can ever match.
Then John told him about protection. He said, "I never gamble my survival. I always keep 3 to 6 months of living expenses in a safe and liquid place. This is your buffer, your emergency shield. It ensures that when life hits you, and it will hit you, you never have to sell your investments at a loss just to survive. This buffer is not a savings fund, it is armor." And the fifth principle, John said quietly, is the one most people never learn until it is too late. Never put everything into one place. Spread your capital. Different industries, different assets, different income streams. If one sector falls, the others keep you standing. Diversification is not a strategy for the fearful. It is the discipline of the wise. The father absorbed every word. For the first time, he didn't see numbers in his mind. He saw a plan. After that conversation, a fire ignited within him. He kept his savings account intact for his emergency buffer, just as John had taught him, but he began to use his remaining capital differently. He studied his city, not like a tourist, but like a businessman. He walked through busy streets, visited crowded markets, and observed people carefully. He was looking for one specific thing, a place where there was heavy foot traffic but no food available. He found it within 2 weeks, a busy commercial street near a transit hub where hundreds of workers passed through every single day during lunch hours, and not a single food stall in sight. He set up a simple food stand there after his regular work shift ended each evening. He cooked himself, served himself, and watched what happened. What happened was beyond anything he expected. The demand was immediate and overwhelming. Workers who had nowhere nearby to eat lined up at his stall every single day. Within the first month, his evening earnings exceeded his monthly salary at the factory. He couldn't believe it. He wasn't doing anything extraordinary. He was simply putting something where nothing existed, exactly where people needed it most. But the demand kept growing, faster than he could serve alone. He hired one worker, set up a second stall beside the first, and trained that worker to run it while he managed both. Now he was not just a worker, he was an owner. He watched the operation carefully, tracking every dollar earned and every dollar spent, just as John had taught him about knowledge and discipline. When the formula became clear to him that high foot traffic plus no food supply equals unstoppable demand, he made his next move. He withdrew the rest of his savings, the full amount he had accumulated over 20 years, and began scanning the entire city for the same pattern. Crowded corners, busy transit stops, market entrances, industrial areas at lunchtime. Anywhere people gathered in numbers but had nowhere to eat. One by one, he planted a food stall at every location he identified. At each one, he placed a trained worker and managed the operation himself on rotation. His monthly salary from the factory now covered his household expenses, just as it always had. But every dollar of profit from every stall was reinvested immediately, never touched, never spent on comfort, exactly as John had said about the snowball. By the end of the first year, he had 11 food stalls running across the city, each one profitable, each one staffed, each one generating income while he slept. The combined monthly profit from all 11 stalls was more than he had saved in the previous 20 years combined.
And then he made his final move of that year. He took his accumulated profits and opened a proper restaurant in the heart of the city. Not just a stall, a real establishment with tables, a full menu, and a name above the door. His name. A brand that people in the city already recognized from his stalls. On the night it opened, Emma came home from college for the weekend. The father sat across the table from his daughter in his own restaurant and ordered her anything she wanted from the menu. He didn't look at the prices. He didn't calculate. He just smiled at her and said, "Order whatever you want, sweetheart." Emma looked around at the full dining room, at the staff moving efficiently, at her father sitting with the quiet confidence of a man who had finally arrived, and she asked him, "Dad, what changed?" He thought for a moment and then said, "For 20 years I protected my money from the world. This year I sent my money out to work in the world. That is the only difference." His journey was far from over. The restaurant was thriving, the stalls were growing, but his eyes were already fixed on the horizon. He was planning to take his brand to other cities, to plant his stalls and open his restaurants wherever the same pattern existed. Crowds without food, demand without supply. The man who once saved every penny and called it a plan now understood that wealth is not something you hoard. It is something you build, expand, and multiply without ever stopping. Saving money will never make you rich, but planting it in the right soil, in the right place, at the right moment, and never stopping, that is what turns a dream into an empire.